Blimey. Good afternoon and welcome to home. My name is Dave Moutry, I'm Director and Chief Executive here, and normally I'm kept as far away from the stages as humanly possible, so it's really quite a treat for me to be up here talking to people. We opened in May last year, and 11 months after opening we welcomed our millionth visitor. Needless to say, we're still in learning mode. If you've not been here before, in addition to this space, we've got 5 cinemas, another theatre space, a flexible black box, gallery spaces, which are, the galleries are in changeover at the moment, so sadly we can't let you in, learning, participation spaces and making spaces, etc. We aim to be a producer, well, we are a producing space, as well as a venue dedicated to presenting the contemporary from around the world and engaging with the people of our city. We aim to be a people place, not a cultural palace. This is arts-led regeneration in action. The buildings outside wouldn't have happened without this building. All of that is due to the vision and the leadership of Manchester City Council, without which this wouldn't have happened. They truly understand the economic and social role of the arts and are completely behind it. But with that, and with them investing such huge amounts of money in the building, comes huge responsibility. And one of the things that we want to take away from What Next is how we can actually turn that responsibility into some sort of concerted action. We hope you've enjoyed the morning at the various venues around Manchester. We're very proud of the work that goes on in this city, but we're also proud of the collaboration that exists between us, whether that's the 5 theatres working on a joined-up talent development strategy, or all of us working together on a joined-up arts and health approach. But it comes with second nature, and that leads into some of the things which I'll talk about in a second. But before that, just a bit of a practical housekeeping thing. You should all have a little brown postcard. For those of you who were born recently, that's the analogue equivalent of an email. And on that, if you can write your actions that are coming out of this, things that you personally are going to do, and then leave it with the post box at the rear or on the ground floor. We're going to post them back to you in 3 months, just as a little reminder. So again, if it was an email, it's the delay button, you know. So, I'll be asked to make a couple of personal observations before I pass you on to the more interesting speakers. And it seems to me some of the stuff I picked up from the conversations with the session chairs is that there's a theme about distributive leadership seems to be coming across as a common thread, and taking ownership, and particularly about us all as individuals being active citizens. That as artists or as arts administrators, we're not disconnected from the world that we live in, and we need to make sure that we make that connection between our professional and life as citizens more broadly. The other thing is that I'm picking up is that we are facing huge levels of challenge, unprecedented in the time that I've worked, 30 odd years I've worked in this, I know it doesn't look like it, but I have, in this business. Huge levels of change and uncertainty. People are unsure about what's going on. And it just seems to me, and other people that I've been speaking to, that we've never needed each other or our audiences and our communities more than we do now. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. I wrote a piece recently for Arts Professional about why we need to be collaborating and supporting each other rather than competing, because actually that's going to be the way we get through all of this. Well, I'm going to hand you over to our next speaker. Sadly, David Land can't make it, but we managed to find another David as a substitute. Fortunately, David Jubb is going to step into David Land's shoes and talk to us, give us some reflections about where we've got to. So, if you'd like to welcome David to the stage, please.
Just to start with some thanks. Big thanks to Home for hosting this, especially to Sheena, Pat, and Jasper and Andy and their teams. Thank you very much. So as Dave says, sadly, David Land is ill, but the joy of What Next is that we're able to step in on behalf of each other. We've spent 5 years getting to know each other, so it helps out in situations like this. What actually happened was that I was halfway through a box set yesterday afternoon, having a really lovely day, when I started to get lots of text messages and emails, as Dave said, it was actually a toss-up between Dave and I, but because he's called Dave and I'm called David, I think I ended up with the long straw. So actually, David Lamb, and actually maybe we could all say get well soon to him, because I'm sure he'll hopefully be watching on the live stream, as will others. So massive welcome to those watching on live stream. Can we all just say get well, David? Get well. Nice one, thank you. So David said, look, I'll send you through a few notes, and then it would be great if you could, say something. And so I thought, Christ, so I got back on the train to London, thought I've got to get my head together. And then actually, of course, David sent me this absolutely perfect, brilliant speech. And I just thought, I'll just deliver that. That's great. I don't have to do anything. So that's what I'm going to do. I do quite a good David Lamb impression, but I'm not going to do that. But maybe in the bar later. So it's really honoured and privileged to perform this, to read this out to you from David, because when I read it, it stirred the blood for me. It made me think this is actually what we collectively as What Next have achieved. And so this is from David Lamb. Get well soon, David. 5 years ago, those of us who were around What Next said we thought it would be a 10-year project. Over that decade, what did we hope to achieve? Thinking about the way that artists, arts organisation and the arts in education operate in this country and the way they relate in their many and varied kinds of audiences and participants, we thought that what we wanted to do was change the culture. It was an ambitious phrase. If there was one change to the culture we wanted to achieve above all others, it was to break away from the assumption that the natural way for us all to relate to each other was on the basis of competition. Neoliberalism assumes that competition is king. And yes, it may well be that in certain ways and on certain levels it is good for us to compete. But for the arts, competition can never be the only way. We wanted to replace this assumption with another, that what is natural to us is to collaborate, to look always for mutual benefit in an infinite number of ways. Perhaps this conference is a good moment to look back at the beginning and to remember how this movement acquired its name. At the start of the coalition government, when it became clear that there would be a massive reduction in public investment across the board, a number of us gathered informally as leaders of arts organisations, big and small, the institutions and the pop-ups, the long-established and the new. And together we sent a letter to the Prime Minister of the day that asked a question. The government had stated that their priority was to reduce the underlying deficit by 50% in the life of one parliament. We asked, we understand that you will cut public investment in the arts and culture, but is this policy or expedience? If you achieve this 50% reduction, as we know, this target was soon reset and has since been abandoned, if you achieve it, will you then reinstate the previous level of investment, or will the cut remain? Here's our key question. What is your arts policy? Do you have one? What's coming? We need to plan, so if you know, then tell us. What's next? The Prime Minister replied with a version of calm down, dear. All will be fine. The lottery will bail you out. As we know, in fact, a 30% reduction in public investment in the arts and culture soon followed. So you might say that the first gathering had no positive outcome. But you'd be wrong. It did. It established a new way for us to come together. Positive, eager for action, non-hierarchical, always on the lookout for the highest common denominators that enable collective action as colleagues, as enthusiasts, as friends. That we have become a national movement has enabled us to continue to make the case for public investment in the arts strongly, effectively, and at the highest levels. But lobbying government, speaking with one voice, turned out not to be the only thing that we could achieve through collaboration. So what have we done? We've created 35 What Next chapters across the UK. We formed strong alliances with the Cultural Learning Alliance, the Creative Industries Federation and the Arts Council. We've convened meetings with national networks, including the new Local Government Network, Arts Development UK, the Local Government Association, the Chief Leisure and Cultural Officers, the Culture and... I always get this acronym wrong, sorry. The Chief Culture and Leisure Officers Association, the Core Cities Group, and the Cultural Commissioning Programme, so as to strengthen our relationships with local authorities. Through our system of setting up working subgroups, we've established an ethics and reputational risk project and submitted an advisory document to the Treasury on tax reform. We've made submissions to the Treasury in the lead up to the last 2 spending rounds, contributing to an unprecedented and unexpected standstill settlement. Our Arts for Britain campaign persuaded a number of local MPs to become national advocates for the arts. We've hosted high-level discussions with Culture and Education Secretaries of State and Ministers, with Shadow Secretaries of Ministers, including Harriet Harman, Jeremy Hunt, Maria Miller, Sajid Javid, John Whittingdale, Michael Gove, Ed Vasey, Tristram Hunt, Nick Gibb, Matt Hancock. Around the election, we convened all manner of hustings, debates and speeches. We arranged a round table for young people to contribute to Ed Vasey's white paper, as well as What Next meetings at Conservative and Labour Party conferences. There have been public What Next debates at festivals, including Latitude, Green Man, Edinburgh and Wilderness. We launched Get Creative in partnership with the BBC, now in its 2nd year. Through Get Creative, 1,000 arts and cultural organisations have developed a closer relationship with the BBC and have become champions of voluntary and participatory arts in their communities. We're partnering with the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation on an inquiry into the civic role of cultural organisations. Up and down the country, we forged hundreds of unlikely alliances, as well as quite likely ones that really should have been forged many years ago. So, 5 years in, where are we now? In the lifespan of movements, social, religious or otherwise, there's a pattern. What starts as inspiration and is for a time energised and kept fluid and responsive to need and changed by enthusiasm and imagination and generosity, sometimes always hardens into structure, into bureaucracy. Rules arise, and then laws with sanctions, and in the end, punishments for those who dissent or disobey. We're 100 miles from that. For us, let's hope that is 100 years away. But even so, there sometimes grows the assumption that in What Next we have created an agency charged with providing a service according to certain fixed regulations that has some sort of duty to do so. Occasionally, for example, our 3 part-time executives are asked, "What's gone wrong? You should have fought for that or for this cause or organised this or that campaign." So here is what Next is really about. It began because a few felt it was needed. It took off because that proved to be true. No one was an expert in organisational design. We just did what seemed obvious. If it didn't work, we tried something different. We kept the door open. We made it up as we went along. If What Next has a message, it's this. If you feel something needs doing, just do it. A conversation should take place. A change is needed, an alliance should be struck, a policy revised or jettisoned, just to make it happen. If you need an ally, find one. We are all around each other, no further than an email away. After years of sustained attack on our public realm, on the things that we do together, on all that we believe in together, on what is ours because it is shared, on what has been won into commonality over history by struggles of class and of race, whether the NHS or a common educational system, human rights, workers' rights, our forests, our cities, our parks, our libraries. We have created a new form of public realm. It is ourselves. It is the alliances we have forged between us, a network, a safety net, an umbrella, a canopy. We have discovered that we are each other's most powerful resource. Look at what we have done over these past few years and look at what we are achieving here today. Get well, Mr. Lamb.
So, hello, you got me? Do I need to project? Oh, you're all right. Okay. Following that really inspirational speech from delivered by David, but from David, what we're going to do now is reflect the fact that we are a movement. We are from across the UK, and just there are 6 chapters who are going to give a bit of a thumbnail 3-minute sketch about where things are up to with their particular chapters. My fantastic technical team have got this really brilliant thing up there with numbers on it that'll count down. So I am empowered to be rude and cut you off at the end. So be as concise as you feel you can. So first up, all the way from Cardiff, we've got Laura Drain.
Dwi'n dechrau siarad yn Gymraeg. Prynawn da, Laura Drain dwi. Dwi'n dysgu yn Cymraeg, ond dwi ddim yn siarad yn Gymraeg eto, and in English. I've lived in Wales for 4 years. I'm learning Welsh. I'm not fluent enough to deliver this in Welsh. I'm not sure the stage text will capture it in Welsh. But I wanted to honour the start to this by using the language that I do have. So I'm Laura Drain. I'm an independent creative producer. I co-founded the chapter in Cardiff with Yvonne Murphy from Oh My Days, and it's been running since 2014. We've been asked to share 3 things, and we're just going to be given like 30-second snapshots. So one key challenge. The key challenge I'd like you to take away that we're still working on is the fact that we are a capital city of a devolved nation. We have some of the same layers and complexities of politics and media that happen in London. We have a city deal which is being brokered between 10 local authorities and more. So it's an incredibly complex environment within which we work. One key achievement, I would say, is Cardiff Without Culture. You can see some of the images from the march, which we coordinated behind me. We mobilised with others, and that's a really key bit for me, to overturn the local authority's decision to cut a proportion of its arts and culture budget. And one of the many wonderful creative things we did was organise a march rather than do all the petitioning and things which we did as well. Another thing that we've done as What Next Cardiff is host a creative hustings for the Welsh Government Assembly elections, which attracted more than 200 people, which made it not just a first for the arts and culture to have a hustings, but also one of the first and biggest hustings events in Wales in the election campaign. And an upcoming action or future focus. So I'm going to have one that's very immediate, which is a tiny plug, and 2 or 3 which are longer term. So the tiny plug is that we're doing a public-facing survey, a 24-hour culture survey, which What Next West Midlands kindly trialled, and when Paul Keynes moved from Birmingham to Cardiff, we used the idea, and we're launching that this weekend with the hashtag #ThisIsCulture. So we want people to fill that survey in and tell us what they do, what they see, what they make, what they play over that weekend, starting this Friday. And then longer term, I would say 3 things briefly. One is that we're engaging with ministers and officials over what might be one of the first cultural policy statements made by a Welsh Government minister, and also talking to our new Assembly Scrutiny Committee, which has culture as part of its remit. We're working with Welsh Government and the 10 local authorities around the meaning of culture within the city deal, particularly thinking about the metro, which will be the kind of tram infrastructure which is built. What's the point of being able to get from Caerphilly to Newport if it's just for work? What else does it need to be? And then in the long term, and particularly post the EU referendum results, I would say we're asking these big, hard questions about the sorts of country that Wales needs and wants to be in the next 5, 10, 15 or 20 years.
Now I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Lynch from Wandsworth.
So I'm also an independent creative producer and chair of the Arts Catalyst and Theatre Rights. And we set up What Next Wandsworth in July 2013, just after the last national conference. And I co-chair What Next with Artie Crashaw from Spare Tyre Theatre. And we're both local residents. We meet monthly, and we have a rolling attendance of about 12 to 15. I think there are about 25 regular attendees, quite small attendees. But we have a mailing list of about 70 individuals, and it's a mixture of community, higher education, and arts organisations. One key achievement. We feel that we've influenced Battersea Power Station placemaking to consult and work more with the local arts sector. And this has been manifested through their partnership with Battersea Arts Centre, who are working with them to develop the Village Hall, which is a new cultural and community centre on the site. And it's also evidenced in 2 recent appointments of people from our sector, from the participatory arts sector. So Kate Scanlon, who some of you might know from her work in the hip-hop events, huge national hip-hop events, is heading up their events team, and Rashida Nalamoso is the Village Hall producer working closely with Battersea Arts Centre. Key challenge, well, an ongoing challenge, I think that we set ourselves right at the start, is to try and embed arts and culture in the thinking and decision-making of the local authority as part of their approach to delivering services. We've said to them, we're not coming to you to ask you for more money, but we want specifically, we're speaking to the directors of housing and health to say, how can the arts help them deliver the services more effectively? What do we have in common, and how could they make a more coherent offer with the resources that they have? So the key action or future focus is really to keep that conversation going. We want to influence their thinking outside of the box of leisure, arts, culture department. We have a really good arts team. They're now a mutual and they're great. They work very much to influence the developers, particularly not just Battersea Power Station, but the whole Nine Elms development. We've got 19 different developers in Wandsworth at the moment to try and influence to have a cultural strategy that's more than just tokenistic. But they find us very useful because of our independence, and we can have meetings and say some things that sometimes they can't, which is great. And in terms of the people who come to the meeting, they feel strongly that they do play a civic role in the community. And so our focus for action is to continue the conversation and to be as specific as we can strategically about what we think is needed.
Next from Sunderland, we have Dave Harper. Sunday name, David. Dave.
Hi, like I said, my name's Dave Harper and I'm from the Sunderland chapter of What's Next. I run a venue, arts hub, I don't like using that word, but gets used a lot towards me. A place called Poprex. We provide affordable artist space. We are a mental health drop-in centre for young people. And these are all things that we've became over the 3 years we've been in existence. We're completely crowdfunded. We remain unfunded by any other major organisation. Probably talk to some of you later on, hopefully, about that. At Poprex, we house our What's Next chapter. I don't know how many of you people have actually been to the city of Sunderland, but it's a small conurbation just south of Scotland. It's a large place, often maligned by our beautiful cousins in Newcastle. Getting the amount of numbers of people in the room without hurting each other in Sunderland, we genuinely see as an achievement. I've been involved with so many drives under different names and banners that have instantly spluttered because people don't trust what that organisation represents and what it does, because there's been no tangible outcome. So I would say our key achievement is just the fact that this group is becoming to look sustainable. That might sound very base and like sort of like a very obvious thing to you, but in our city of Sunderland, that remains to be a very big deal. So that remains our key achievement. Our key challenge, we think, is the image of our city and how we project the positives around art and culture. And we feel to do that, it involves unearthing our very hidden strata of creatives. Poprex, the place that I run, has the ethos that it's the antidote to that, whereas we realise that people can be really put off very quickly by the bureaucracy and the hurdles that are put in front of them, and therefore their achievements and their creativity is never seen by people. So that is our main challenge, to make sure the people that are creative and the people that are positive and the people that are great about our city get the exposure and the support that they need, and that's really key to the What's Next team that are in Poprex at the moment. Actions for future. I think mainly converting the relationship that we have into something much more positive. There's very much a DIY ethic in Sunderland and very much in Tyne-Wear as well. And it's legitimatising of that, which we think is going to be key in the future. We've been doing it for years, but without any ability to really shout about it. And that's what we hope to achieve with our What's Next.
Thank you, Dave. We're now going to go to Nottingham and hear from Cathy McArdle.
So we are What Next Nottingham. We've been around 18 months. We're made up of all the arts and cultural organisations in the city of Nottingham, large, small, professional, voluntary and participatory, as well as HE, FE and creative industries. Our key achievement is that I think we've created a more joined up, creative, networked cultural sector in the city, and we've mobilised cultural organisations in the city so that now we've secured funding for the development of a cultural framework in the city, which we will develop through conversations, which will be ready by March 2017. Our key challenge is leadership and value. How can culture be embedded across the city's activities if the city leaders don't understand or believe in the value of culture? And then how do we convince our leaders so it becomes policy, not personality driven? And then how do we make sure that culture is integral to the life and the story of the city? A linked challenge is diversity. Nottingham suffers from a lot of inequality and a lot of poverty. So how can everyone enjoy a wide range of cultural engagement at multiple levels in their schools, their homes, their neighbourhoods, their venues and the city? And we want to explore systemic approaches to that are not necessarily driven that are not part of the conventional thinking around diversity. So how do we diversify governance of our cultural organisations? How do we diversify the workforce? How do we diversify the people who make the decisions about what culture happens in the city? And our third challenge is how do we galvanise collective action? How do we build the involvement of the cultural organisations? How do we make them realise that together we are stronger, that together our voice is more powerful, and together that we can generate collective change? Our key action is to keep going, finish what we've started. So we've got to finish our cultural framework and have it ready by March 2017, and make sure that it reflects the whole diversity of voices and experiences in the city. We have to finish our Gulbenkian location study by the end of October. We're also collaborating on understanding the story of Nottingham with Marketing Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, so we need to contribute to that piece of work and the emerging story of place for Nottingham. We're launching our cultural education partnership, which we're calling the Cultural Education Challenge Nottingham, because there's a challenge back to the city to look at the cultural experience of its children and young people. And we want to shift the discourse, expand and extend our networks and our sphere of influence, increase the quality of the debate, build our collective action and our visibility, and place culture at the heart of the city's planning and growth.
Okay, and now to make sure we spread the love between Sunderland and Newcastle, we're going to hear from Newcastle Gateshead from Patricia Stead.
Just start by saying I live in Sunderland. Okay, so I moved to the North East about 10 years ago to work for the Arts Council, who I don't work for now. And one of the things that was really interesting about moving to the North East was that my colleagues would say, it's so brilliant up in the North East. People meet and talk all the time. And we did. We really did. Whether it was the Regional Development Agency or the Government Office or the Association of North East Councils or the Arts Council, there always seemed to be something happening that people would come to and talk and listen and hear, and some planning that we were all involved in. But of course, we're quite a few years on from that, and there is no RDA, there's no Government Office, ANEC's been mothballed, and the Arts Council is very, very much smaller than it was. And really, the only people that get talked to these days are the MPOs. So there's a whole community of people in the cultural sector in Newcastle and Gateshead, which is a big cultural sector, who are not involved in discussion, who don't get invited to meetings, who don't get Arts Council briefings sent to them by emails. We tried a few times to set up What Next in the North East, and it just didn't happen because there were too many people and it was too big in terms of administration. In Newcastle, we had a Newcastle Cultural Partnership, and we managed to get a strategy together, but it quite quickly fell into the same people turning up once every 2 months with the same agenda items, and nothing ever seemed to move on and change. And then one day we had a meeting where more people than usual turned up for this one meeting, and collectively everybody said, this is really dull, we don't get enough done, let's just not do this anymore. So what we decided to do instead was have a party. So we produced a summer party invitation and we sent it out far and wide in Newcastle and Gateshead, and we invited everybody to come to a party, and you got a free drink if you had your invitation with you. And at that event, we then announced that we were going to set up a What Next, and that's what we did. We set What Next up a year past in September. In the December, we held a very large event in Newcastle, which 250 people attended. And the purpose of that was to ask the people who were the strategic movers and shakers in the North East where they thought culture fitted in the plans for devolution, for LEPs, for anything. We got talked at. We had a lot of talking at. And actually, what came out of that was nobody really had a plan. Nobody had an idea. That kind of fueled What Next to keep going. And of course, that was also the period when the corporate spending review was coming along. So we had quite a lot to discuss. So since then, because I know I've got to move on, we've been meeting every single week for just over a year. Every week we have an agenda. We have lots of people come to talk to us. Numbers have fallen. Some weeks I turn up and I sit there and think, nobody else is going to turn up. And then people wander in with their lunch. Sometimes it gets to 1 o'clock because we meet from 12:30 to 1:30. And I think, I'll never last to 1:30. Trying to get people to stop talking at 1:30 is always a challenge. So we're still going. We are described by one member of the Sunderland branch as the militant branch of What Next. So key achievements. We have 483 people currently on our Facebook page. 2 people joined today. We meet every week, and there's an opportunity for people to meet and talk. Especially important are those freelancers and those smaller organisations, and they're coming. Our key challenge is actually basically to have the energy to just keep going week after week and to raise our profile. Our key action, my time is up, is to keep getting information out to people. There's not enough information going out. We're not working collectively enough because there are too many people out there who just don't know what the bigger agendas are or don't have the opportunities to get involved. We need to grow our voice for Newcastle and Gateshead in the sector, and we need to join up with our other What Next branches. There's Sunderland, there's also Darlington, in and around Darlington, and we need to have a voice. We need to move and shake our region. Thanks.
And finally, coming all the way from Bolton to speak about the Greater Manchester chapter, we've got Roddy Gold.
To follow all of those. So the What Next Greater Manchester chapter was at one point the What Next Northwest. It became quite a big region and remit to cover, so we've kind of shrunk in a little bit and meet once a month here at home. But I believe there's work underway to start a Merseyside chapter, and everyone is welcome at our meetings. So our key action, and the image I chose here is the Manchester skyline of the future. And I think that's important because this is a city region which is changing dramatically with devolution. And of course, we're not the only city region to have a directly elected mayor soon. And that is going to be, I think, our single biggest opportunity and action for the foreseeable future. City mayors come with a massive budget, a huge remit, a huge range of partnerships, high-profile cabinet equivalent roles, really. So how do we place culture on their radar? And I think that's the single biggest action we can and should take. But that also leads into what is our biggest challenge here in our chapter. How do we do that? How do we form those unlikely alliances with education, health, transport, the LEP, all these different things that are changing around us? Directly elected mayors will fundamentally change the way that local government in our regions works. How do we put culture in there? And at the same time, how do we make sure that decisions around culture are democratic still? Devolution could easily be centralisation into a different place if we're not careful. And alongside that, how do we keep people engaged and involved? As Patricia said, how do we represent the individual artists, the emerging artists, the next generation, the people that aren't big building organisations that can contribute? And of course, how do we ensure the diversity of our sector and indeed of our movement, looking around the room here today? So these are really big challenges as we try to place ourselves within a much bigger, rapidly changing context. So what's our achievement? I'll be honest, in the last 12 months, it's been a bit of a struggle trying to run What Next Northwest. There's been two of us, and I think Fiona and I would admit it was a lot to do. So we reconstituted and reformed, and I think that's a big achievement, is keeping going. As Patricia said, it's the momentum, bringing people together on a regular basis to share ideas, to share conversation, to share information, to share links. And what we did was, when we were struggling, was we simply asked more people to work with us. And it goes back to something David Land said earlier about, everyone being involved. So my final plea to you all, as my clock ticks down, is please remember it's a movement. It's not passive. It requires all of us and all of you to take action. Please don't leave it to the people sat on stage here. It's a movement. Please get up and move with us. Thank you very much.
Okay, so there are 6 snapshots. There are another 29 snapshots from around the country that we could have had. What I would say to any of you out there, if you're from Cardiff, Wandsworth, Sunderland, Nottingham, Newcastle, Gateshead, Manchester, and you're not engaged with one of those chapters or any of the other chapters, please have a talk to anybody and they'll make sure you're on the right mailing list, etc. As our speakers take their seats again, if you'd just like to join us in thanking them for their contributions. My duty is to introduce the next speaker. Our next speaker is a political commentator who appears regularly on television and radio. Having worked in politics for 8 years as a senior Labour Party advisor, both in government and opposition, she's in a unique position to analyse and comment on current affairs. During her time in Westminster, she worked for Harriet Harman and Ed Miliband, advising on Prime Minister's questions, speeches, media policy, etc. Previously, our speaker worked as a comedian performing stand-up in clubs, so obviously a great relationship with politics there, and theatres across the country, and Edinburgh Fringe Festival, I should say. She was a semi-finalist in the BBC and Channel 4 New Talent competitions, so she's understandably in much demand as a speaker and a host due to her unique background in politics and stand-up. So please welcome to the stage Aisha Hazraki, please.
Hello everybody, it's really great to be here today, and thanks very much for that introduction. So as Dave said, I was a special advisor. I worked for Gordon Brown, Harriet Harman and Ed Miliband, and I'm sure you'll all agree that was a massive success story. Yeah, my advice is absolutely brilliant, by the way. For full disclosure, I would like to say I was also advising the Remain campaign. And I did help Angela Eagle for 1 week. So I'm basically like the Jonah of British politics. And if I had any decency, I'd go and offer my services to Donald Trump immediately. Half man, half what's it, who knew? Right, so I'm here just to tell you a wee bit about just the general political landscape, and I think where What Next can fit in. And I'd just like to begin by paying tribute to the work that What Next has done. I did a lot of work with these guys, and I worked for Harriet Harman when she had the brief in opposition for culture, media and sport. And I think our collaboration really showed, even in opposition, we did a lot of work in Parliament, in the media, trying to kind of advance the debate. And I think you're starting from a really, really strong foundation. I think What Next have achieved a lot in the short time that it's been going. So look, if there's one word I'd use to describe politics at the moment, it's disruption. all the norms have been upset and all the norms have been disturbed. I remember the night of the EU referendum campaign, I was in ITN studios with lots of the great and the good, politicians, commentators, people that run polling companies, and they were like, don't panic. There is no way we are leaving the EU. There's just no way that's going to happen, because these things don't happen in British politics. Upsets like this just don't happen. And then we all, saw the result. I was actually in a green room in the morning, Good Morning Britain, when the result came in, and I was in a room with Nigel Farage, Douglas Carswell, Nadine Dorris and Stanley Johnson, Boris Johnson's dad. And it's really weird as a Labour Party person when your biggest political ally in the room is Boris Johnson's dad. That is quite weird. So we're in this very, very, difficult position. We've had 3 major elections in 2 years. We've had elections in the Labour Party. There is just so much kind of disruption going on. We've seen the rise of the far right in Europe. We've got, the rise of, we had Bernie Sanders for a while, then sort of Donald Trump. All the kind of political rules feel like they're being ripped up. And the truth is, nobody quite knows right now how Brexit is going to play out for the economy, for the country, for our place in the world, diplomatically. And the truth is, I think in terms of national government, lots of things are going to grind to a bit of a halt because everybody is going to be so preoccupied with Brexit. But look, there is a new team, and there's obviously great risks and there are great challenges. But I think for arts and culture, there is great opportunity at this moment as well. And I think politicians do get arts and culture more than they have done in a long, long time. And again, as I say, that is a lot down to the work that What Next, the fact that you have created many, many advocates of your beliefs in local politics, in national politics, in Parliament, in the Commons and in the Lords, and that's really important. But look, there's still a long way to go. The work continues. I think we've made a very good argument about the economics of arts and culture. We've made a good argument about quality of arts and culture, and we're very good at making the kind of hearts and minds argument. But I think more needs to be done now, and I think it's really important for arts and culture to feel that it can move into talking about the big, big political challenges facing our age, because, arts and culture have got to be part of the conversation, not just in specific isolated ways, but actually tapping into the big things. Look, if Marmite can be part of the Brexit discussion, arts and culture has got absolutely every right to be talking about this as well. And I think the way to do it is for the sector to ask itself the question, how can you be part of the national conversation? What are the big challenges that this new government and the country is facing? And how can you be part of the solution? And how can you assert yourself to be more muscular? Because it's really important that you do that. There's lots of spaces that are being opened up now, partly because the country, is in quite a lot of turmoil. And I think that means that there should be no-go areas. And I think the arts have got to be part of that. So what are the big issues facing politics at the moment? And where can you guys kind of fit into this? Well, of course, first of all, there is Brexit. Britain's foreign policy. What is Britain's place in the world? And actually, arts is a huge part of that. Matthew Hancock came recently to an event I was at, and he was talking about arts and culture being Britain's global calling card as it does its diplomacy around the world, and that is very, very important. What else does the government care about? Education is a big thing. We know we are about to go into a big row on grammar schools. Now, whatever your opinion on grammar schools is, there is a great space for arts and culture in this debate, because whether you agree with selection or not, what everybody wants is better education for all children, and arts and culture is a really, really important part of that. We've heard about social mobility a lot. Theresa May said on the steps of Downing Street she's very, very concerned about this. Again, this opens up a big opportunity for your sector as well. Diversity is a big issue. I mean, we have big expectations of the government and politics on diversity, but the arts sector has to also, as Roddy was saying, it would be nice just once to have a big arts organisation run by somebody who wasn't a white man. You know, that would be nice, and we've got to kind of really push ourselves on that as well. Things like the environment, sustainability, cohesion, integration, a sense of place, a sense of community. These are really big ticket political issues that the nation is grappling with, and arts and culture has a place in all of that. So in terms of where the different parties are, we know that with our new Prime Minister, Theresa May, she, I think, will see a social mobility imperative for arts and culture. I think she will feel probably less kind of culturally fluent than David Cameron was. He was much more kind of open to the arts, I think. But look, I think there is ground for you doing a lot of work to help the government at the moment. The government has got lots of big challenges facing it. You have a new team in Karen Bradley, and she's going to be doing a lot of work on infrastructure. There's a big argument for getting arts and culture as part of the infrastructure narrative as well as and we talked earlier in some of the sessions about devolution. The Labour Party is in a difficult place at the moment. There is no denying that. But the Labour Party is still and should be an effective opposition in Parliament. And certainly the work that What Next did with us when we were in opposition with Harriet Harman showed you can use Parliament very, very effectively. Jeremy Corbyn cares deeply about arts and culture. He made it centre stage of his re-election campaign. Tom Watson, the deputy leader, has just been appointed as the shadow DCMS Secretary of State, with a very good deputy in a man called Kevin Brennan, who is an MP from Cardiff. So use those MPs, because MPs will want to make your case for you in Parliament. And just to pick up on something that Roddy said, which is very, very important, is local government. Local government is going to be where a lot of the action is for your sector, both good and bad. We know that there are a lot of difficult cuts coming down the track. And one of the things that, being very honest, I don't think there is enough of a national conversation about how much local arts organisations have been affected by the swinging cuts to local government. I think people out there don't realise how reliant small arts organisations are on local authorities, and how these cuts impact really heavily, and how they will continue to. So I think there needs to be more made of that sort of nationally. And these new metro mayors are going to be absolutely vital. They are going to have money, and they're going to have significant amounts of power. And I'd say now is the time to get in and start lobbying them. They are all going to be selecting their candidates. And I think What Next should be asking every candidate to set out what is there going to be their kind of cultural manifesto, every single one of them. I think as well, in these times of difficult, financial restraints, collaboration, that is absolutely essential. You guys are all very good at collaborating, within your own sector. How can you collaborate with other sectors who are also very important, and going to be hit as well? I think the idea of arts, culture and sport connecting more, particularly in terms of dealing with local authorities, is very, very important. So look, it's an exciting time. It's a challenging time. You have a solid foundation on which to build. But I think you've got to be part of the national political conversation. Make your case with passion and evidence. But you know something? We need you to get involved, and politics actually needs to have arts and culture play its part in the debate. Thank you very much.
Not just me, don't worry. Sit next to you here. Are you? So, I was at a fascinating 3 conversations at Z Arts this morning, and I think all of you were in different conversations around the city. And what we were able to do was have a conversation and then bring us all together and talk about all the other things we'd missed in those morning sessions. And what we've done is ask 3 people to kind of capture all the things they heard from this morning, things that really resonated with them, and feed them back here now, so that essentially you get a bit of a snapshot of all the conversations that have been taking place. And then there's going to be an opportunity for you, there'll be some microphones, to bring up anything you've not heard that you heard this morning, you'd like to repeat, or that's not been said at all today that you think's important to be on the agenda, or if there's an action you wish to ask people, you ask your colleagues in the room to take with you. So I'll give them a brief introduction, then hand over. Our first speaker will be Carol Walker, who works at Contact Theatre here in Manchester. Our second speaker will be Jamie Bedard, who's an actor and co-director of Diversity. And our final speaker will be Paul Lee Hamilton, who is the Vice Chair of the Chief Culture and Leisure Officers Association. So over to you, Carol. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So this morning I was asked to come in on behalf of Contact Theatre, being a young person that has worked there for a very long time, and being involved with so many different projects with the theatre there. And I was asked to contribute to the talk on what can we do to support and enable young and diverse talent. And there was many interesting things that came up about, well, we've got all of this young talent, how can we merge it together and actually get young people involved? And one of the things that came up first was, well, how can venues and organisations help young people? What is their role and how do they support young people? It's all well and good saying that you're going to do something, but actually doing it is a different thing. And I found that some of the theatres in Manchester have been absolutely brilliant because they actually do things. It was great before when it was said, if you feel something needs doing, then do it. It's so true. I'm a huge advocate for doing. And we also have to meet in the middle because a lot of young people also need to step up and show that they're interested. But how do we actually open it up so as many young people feel comfortable enough to do that? There seems to be organisations that want to work with young people, but how? That's what kept on coming up. How do we actually engage these young people? What is it we can do to reach young people in Manchester that are in a different area to where our building is? What is it that we can actually do? And there was talk on how grassroots and larger organisations need to work together and form partnerships. So the theatres in Manchester, freelancers in Manchester, actually how can we join together to ensure that our pool of networking is so big that we know different young people can work in different projects that we have. Another action that we talked about was how do we break the tradition of employing people like ourselves? It happens. In all organisations, we tend to employ people that look like us or are like us. How do we break that? How do we actually stop it? And we wanted to ask organisations to actually do something, to actually employ outside of their norm. And by doing that, they're bringing in new and fresh faces. And that will also trickle down into those organisations because they'll know new people who they may be able to bring into different projects and get involved. And it's actually taking those steps in doing something. And as Aisha just said, it's about collaboration. How can we all work together and do something? So this morning was really interesting for me because going in as a young person and just talking about my experiences, it was great to see that so many other people were pushing for this, that they actually wanted this to happen because they see how good it can be for young people. And if we can create these opportunities, then young people will take them and they will do so many good things. And it is a risk, but actually, how can we take that risk and for it to have a positive impact on all of our organisations? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Jamie.
Can you hear me? Good. We had a really good discussion. need to change to make diversity more part of the sector. And what has changed in the last 20 years, we came to the conclusion that not a lot. So I don't want to come back here in another 20 years saying about diversity, but we might be. The arts sector is lagging behind the commercial sector. A lot of big artists are going straight into the commercial sector rather than coming into the public sector. And that seems ridiculous and annoying. I think diversity is theoretical the way we talk about it. It's funding. That's why we talk about diversity rather than believing in it and making the changes we need to make it a reality. Diverse people are very real. We are real. We're not some with something to do with that. The other thing that I know is a lot of disabled people are really feeling cut at the moment. Disabled people are 19 more times affected by obstetrics than non-disabled people. And a lot of people I know are working on surviving rather than working. And we need to connect to the wider political stuff. We need advocates around enabling disabled people to work. But still, give me a minute, I'm losing my breath. I'm not gonna die. 40% of MPOs don't mention access on their website, and that is ridiculous. If you're getting public money, you've got to connect to the public out there. And if you're not, you should have your money taken away. So, yeah, we should talk loud more and maybe someone in my section come and say more, but that'll do for the time, please. My time is up.
Bang on time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Colin.
Okay. Hi, Polly Hamilton. I'm Vice Chair of the Chief Culture and Leisure Officers Association, so very much working at a national level, but at a local level, of course, we are the coalface of the cuts that come through local government. But the session this morning was about culture and placemaking and partnership and how we can work together. And three of us spoke, myself giving an overview of some of the ways, some of the approaches that were being taken around the placemaking agenda in terms of cultural planning, delivery of events, learning and engagement, the importance of talent development so that we have a legacy, and cultural infrastructure and public realm. And that all of that, of course, is about delivering on outcomes that relate to prosperity, economic development, identity, a sense of belonging, social impacts like well-being and so forth. I should just say, can I just revert back? There's a lot of talk, obviously, about 30% cuts in local government, and that is true, but that doesn't mean to say that we have lost 30% of our arts and culture provision. In fact, far from it, and in many places, some of the most unexpected places that I've had the privilege of working, or that my colleagues work, in Stoke-on-Trent, in Leeds, in Peterborough, many, many different places, and in my own place in Blackpool, we've actually increased provision, and we've increased the numbers of people who are engaging, and it's important to remember that amongst all of this. So we had a superb discussion as well. I gave an overview. A wonderful man called Mike Locke, who I'd never spoken to before these sessions. He came to us from North Kesteven Council, a district council, and talked about an amazing project to do with integrating art into leisure, and created an extraordinary digital water flume in a swimming pool that celebrated the history relating to the Vulcan bomber. Who knew? I mean, the extraordinary stuff going on in places. And then the brilliant David Micklem talked about 64 million artists and everyday creativity and how important that is. So, the really key themes that came across, we need to be really clear that when we're talking about great art and culture, what we also mean is great creativity. There are plenty of ways that we can unlock support from the business sector, from local government, from all sorts of interesting partners, but it doesn't necessarily have to start on the basis of how much money have you got. It actually needs to start on what can you bring and what do you value. And partnerships, of course, are integral, and they are therefore on the basis of shared values, and they're about people and rarely about institutions. What actions did we talk about? Well, fundamentally opening up the language so that we can create some common ground. We need to identify more champions, both within different sectors. Find Mike. Whatever sector, you need to find the Mike in that sector. And whether they're popular champions that are part of the public imagination, the Johnny Vegases, the Danny Boyles, or even somebody like a Nina Conti, who are very much part of the popular imagination but understand the different worlds. And encouraging investment on the basis of what do we want the future to look like, rather than what the past should tell us it once was. I'm going to finish just by saying a note of hope. Somebody suggested that 5% of Arts Council investment could support, David Micklem suggested 5% of Arts Council investment could support 1,000 cultural connectors. But the reality is that all of us here are cultural connectors. And that's where we need to get to, is that it doesn't matter which organisation you work for, you are a cultural connector. And it's really important, I think, that the people in this room believe in their own brilliance, because there is a financial sector that's created a crisis, which means that the roller coaster has gone downhill. But let's remember, it also goes up. And it's a little Blackpool reference for you there.
Thank you very much. So we've heard from Kyle about how the grassroots and venues can work together, opportunities for young people, how we break recruiting like us. Jamie picked up on the issue of recruitment, looking at the commercial sector, which does far better than we apparently do in terms of diversity, how we advocate and champion for those who have disabilities to be able to cope with austerity, which has hit hard, and the shocking fact that 40% of MPOs don't mention access on their website. And we've talked about how we can take a positive approach to it, how we open up creativity and not just talk about cuts, finding Mike, opening the language and encouraging investment based on the future. So those are just some of the things we've heard so far today. I think there's some microphones somewhere around. Brilliant. So if I don't know if you can see with the lights the way they are, but are there things that you've heard that you really need the whole room to hear? Are there actions you want to take, questions you want to pose, or things that haven't been talked about so far? No? Okay, I can't sing for 10 minutes. You wouldn't like it, believe me. It's not good. Is there anything from any of the other sessions? Oh, there we are. Hey. I can't see though with these lights. Esther, can you wait for the mic to get you, because the streaming and the captioning is picking up on what's being said. Great relay. We're going to beat the Olympians at this, no worries. But if we can wait for the microphone, it just means what you said is getting properly captured. Thank you very much.
Hi. My name's Esther Ferry-Kennington from Horse and Bamboo Theatre, but also here as part of Arts Lancashire. And Lancashire as a rural area, we've not quite managed to make a What's Next chapter work, and I kind of had a question for the room about areas in which geographically people are very widely spread with no kind of obvious geographical centre or travel route. Am I getting a spotlight? No. Yeah, just because it felt quite urban, and just a discussion about how we might make that work in sort of rural spread areas. Thank you.
There was a Lancashire chapter at one point that Jenny Rutter was running, but if you speak to anyone from the National Leads or just any of the existing chairs, I'm sure would talk to you about helping set one up and get one going and share our experiences. Great. Any other questions or comments? There's a question here.
Question, and I was hoping to have a few more minutes to formulate how I was going to ask it, because it's a little bit sensitive. But basically, in terms of, it's become very, very important to me today in terms of as I'm building local partnerships, and so I lead one of the smaller What Next groups, and also activity in a place where there's very little infrastructure. And so I'm working really hard to build partnerships with political organisations and community and all across sectors. And with a sort of What Next hat on, we set up a workshop a few weeks ago that was about looking at an issue that's very close to the hearts of lots of our communities. That I'm going to have to name. Basically, the library's being closed due to local council funding cuts, and is this being streamed?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, the local council who are trying to support us in other areas, because we're so few people, there's very few people can do different things. The local council were not happy that we were facilitating a workshop to enable community members to discuss it, and how that didn't feel like a unique experience. How does anybody have advice on how to work when there's so few people trying to do lots of potentially conflicting things? How to manage that?
Is there anyone here who would be willing to just spend 5 minutes in the break offering some advice, some experience, some guidance? If so, would you put your hand up now? All those who... Yeah, Polly's here. If you two can connect to the break, that would be great. Thank you very much. Are there any other... we've got one hand shooting right up at the back there.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Nikki Locke. I run East Durham Creates, which is one of the Creative People and Places projects in East Durham. And it was rather than just a question, just a lot of the things that people are talking about today. With Creative People and Places, we're an action learning programme. So we've been trying lots of different things in lots of different places, lots of different rurals, cities, all these different places. So, and quite a lot of our kind of learning that we've done, because we're really honest, it's exactly the kind of ethos and mindset that all here together, so we admit what doesn't quite work, or we might have done a little bit differently. But there's lots of us out there running lots of little tests, so if you want to kind of have a think about how you might do something, then please go and check out some of the work that we've been doing, because you never know, we might have already tested it, it's something that you're thinking about. But yeah, we're a good resource, and it's just great to hear that. So some big joining up to be doing there, I think, as well, definitely. Thanks.
Thank you. Someone else over here would like the mic next? Is there anyone on the upstairs?
Hiya. I think kind of pricing the lady's question from over there, but probably something that a lot of us feel is, what support can we get from perhaps What Next or our other local partnerships when effectively what we are doing is biting the hand that feeds?
I think that's a really good point, actually. It's a really delicate relationship sometimes, isn't it? I don't know whether people want to, it's not for me to give answers, talk in the room, or whether actually it's worth you trying to find either Polly at the break or any of the kind of national leads. So Dave Mutree's put his hand up there to kind of talk through experience. Laura from Cardiff as well. This is what Next is about. We're all in it together. So please seek out your colleagues and take advice. You're not likely to be the first person treading down the road. And there are other people from the national team, Lizzie and Hannah, Claire and others here today, who I'm sure will be happy to talk you through or put you in touch with your colleagues from elsewhere in the country. We've got a comment in front here.
Already. It's actually slightly picking up on that point as well. Polly, I agree with your positivity. We are all here because we are supporters and connectors, but we are not all supported. And I'm an independent artist. I am lucky enough to have circumstances where, due to various factors, I can pay my own way for a lot of work that I do, which means that I can give stuff back to my community because that's what I care to do. There are probably lots of artists who want to do that, but are not in a position to do it without that support. So where you're saying that you're still getting the same, result out of less money, I would ask, how much of that is being subsidised by the artists rather than by other funds?
Do you want to take the mic there?
Just a quick response to that. Obviously, I think I would say about local government is it's worth remembering it is a spectrum like any other sector. So you're going to get people who really are great, and you're going to get people who are less great, who need help and support in seeing how things can be done differently. I live with an artist. I support an artist, very real way. So I do feel your pain. I can speak in Blackpool. Blackpool has been very fortunate because we were able to we bid for Creative People and Places funding, we got it. And whilst there are always going to be those local artists who feel that they would like more, should like more, but we have got evidence of a number of artists now who are able to make a living in Blackpool in a way that they just simply weren't able to 3 years ago. Now, that's a fantastic success story. And when I was talking before about talent development, for me, the leaders of the future are those who are those artists, those emerging fledgling organisations where you've got great imaginative, creative, extraordinary people that just need that little bit of extra help. And I think that's where Creative People and Places, combined with what the local authority had been doing previously through the Arts Service, I think that's been a legacy of which I'm really proud. But I do accept it's not the same everywhere. But the fact is, in terms of the local authority, arts officers and people working within cultural services, they are themselves the people who are trying to make the case desperately to retain funds. And each year we go into a bidding round along with all our other colleagues. And to be very brutal, it's really, really tough and it's very lonely, and it can be very difficult to make the case to other officers and to members that, how can you compare child safeguarding with arts and culture? Now, I argue both are important, but all of us have got to do our bit. In terms of the how do we make it work, there is no magic bullet on any of this. It is just about, I think, networks like this and continuing to find different ways. But the money in Blackpool has come from a whole set of other places. It's come from the lottery. It's come from places like public health. It's come from, in some small cases, the business community. So it's come from, what we have is a wider set of funders now funding the sector, whereas previously it was entirely, and I mean pretty much 100%, the local authority with a very small amount of arts lottery money coming in. That has now changed. because of partly because it had to, but partly because of the drive that we've done to try and create distributed leadership across the town. So I know other places are doing it, and I'm happy to talk to anyone afterwards.
Otherwise, the rest of the schedule is going to be filled up. But thank you for that. If you haven't had a chance to ask or comment on anything now, please catch people at the break time or later on in the day. I've been asked to make one quick parish announcement before the break, which is that if you have yet to collect your bursary, please do so before the end of the day, otherwise you won't be able to, unfortunately. Hannah will be at a desk on the ground floor at the break now and at 5 p.m. at the end to distribute those. There's now a 15-minute comfort break. Tea and coffee will be served in the event space, which is on the top floor. That's upstairs on the second floor. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to ask everyone to be able to say what they wanted to, but hopefully there'll be time later on. Thank you.
Afternoon. I'm really sorry we've just a bit late because I know some of you probably have trains later, but we have got a very exciting final series of sessions for you, starting with Peter Bazalgette, the Chair of the Arts Council, who's not here in person, but we're going to show a short film. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for inviting my virtual self to your conference today. My apologies for not being with you in person. I wanted to begin by paying tribute to the work What Next has done over the last 3 or 4 years. I think historically there's been a tradition for the arts sector to shout very noisily, quite effectively, to campaign strongly, but perhaps not to be so good at dialogue. And the thing I'm really heartened by and encouraged by is the way in which What Next has established a dialogue with national and local government, so that as well as being a successful policy forum, What Next has got traction with those policies, with politicians, and in some cases had those policies adopted. I think that's a great step forward, so I pay tribute to What Next for that today. And what has it meant? It's meant, for a start, a really good, positive funding settlement with the government for the next 4 years. I believe What Next had some real equity in that settlement. It's meant a better articulation of the case for public funding in arts and culture, right across the board. We call it the holistic case. So the intrinsic value of arts and culture, personal identity, national identity, empathetic citizens, the benefits to society. Wherever you look, in prisons, in hospitals, in care homes, you find the arts doing an incredibly important job. The symbiotic relationship with education. Arts and culture should be at the core of any decent education. That's not a message I believe we've yet successfully got over enough to national government. And then, of course, the economic value. And at the heart of that argument lies the whole case for the creative industries. That's going to be incredibly important going forward. And I really do believe with What Next help, we've won that argument that arts and culture is the incubation for the creative industries, such an important part of the growth of our economy going forward in the future. So what about the next 4 years? With What Next's help, we need arts and culture to achieve a much better reach so it enriches more people in more communities. We need to make it even more powerful as, if you like, the glue in our society, the glue in our communities, the glue in our nation. What will that mean in particular? I think we all agree we've got to make much better progress.
Thanks, Baz. Well, I'm sure we'll fix that and we'll play it later if we've got the time. Terribly sorry for the glitch, but we'll move seamlessly on. And I'd really like to introduce to everybody now Andrea Stark, who led one of the work streams this morning on LEPS. And Andrea's very exciting role now is Director of the Foundation for Future London. And she's just told me she's going to talk to us all about how to find our home teams in 10 minutes. Andrea, welcome.
I'm sorry I'm not Baz. How to find your home team? Well, that's a vernacular way of me saying, how do we understand collective leadership of place? And this quick talk is a bit of a reprise of some of the highlights of a short talk I was invited to give at a What Next meeting in London quite a few months ago. And the talk at that time, I was working in South Essex, developing a creative industries park, and I was asked by colleagues in London to give my reflections about Team London, although they don't regard themselves as Team London. And some of those reflections were along the lines of, at the time, there was a big talk about rebalancing the cultural economy, and London was spending a lot of its time talking about or wearing a hair shirt about what's happening in the rest of the country. And my view of that is that they weren't attending to the business at home in Team London. And what I mean by that is that London, and I think London is illustrative of other major urban centres in England, London has critical mass. The issue for London is about planning and coordination, and about being self-aware enough to understand that you do have a collective leadership responsibility. Because if you don't act as a collective leadership, then how will you understand where the underserved are and how you're overserving some parts of the London community? And in other parts of the country, where there isn't as much critical mass, we need collective leadership even more. We need an enduring compact with the public sector. Now, you cannot do that on a singular, unilateral organisational front. You have to do that by being part of a collective leadership, what Team Manchester has done extraordinarily well. And in places where there aren't major towns and cities, like the area I worked in and South East Local Enterprise Partnership, which covered all of Essex, all of Kent and East Sussex, you need other ways to achieve scale, to get visibility. So we formed ourselves into a creative industries business leaders group to provide expert advice to our LEP about how it could get behind this growth sector in a meaningful way. I think you need collective leadership so that you can understand long-term spatial agendas as well as your own sectoral agendas. And I think, again, Greater Manchester is a really brilliant example of how a culture-led approach to growth and spatial planning is paying dividends. But I also want to say, particularly coming into London after many, many years of working elsewhere in the country, that for me, you need collective leadership even more in an area where there's just so much going on. And that collective leadership needs to take responsibility to, frankly, make less projects and have greater coordination. Probably what Baz was going to segue into there. Because at the moment, there's nothing worse than places that are suffering from projectitis. And you know those places where projectitis has become a chronic condition. And you know that what that means is brilliant things happen for about 3 weeks, now nothing happens for 3 years. Brilliant people arrive for 3 months and then disappear for a number of years. We have it within our gift to cure projectitis by being more disciplined, by holding back our individual project proposals, by being less frenetic with project activity. Now, I know for some of you that are working freelance in very small organisations, you're probably thinking, this woman is really irritating. Well, I suppose I'm addressing my remarks to those organisations that have longevity, that could actually take more of a collective leadership role in coordinating the efforts of others. And if you put that in an industrial context, you might say it's an industrial partnership supporting the supply chain, or maybe you're just going to say, we want to bring others on so that together we can achieve a successful collective leadership of place. We talked about civic leadership today. I think it's the same thing. I think my challenge to those of you that have funded organisations, particularly those funded by the public sector, if you're working in an area with a lot of infrastructure, coordinate better, plan properly, reach more people. Don't be asked to do it, just do it. And if you're in an area that has limited infrastructure, make friends. I worked in Sunderland for 7 years. So Dave and Patricia, Sunderland and Newcastle got talked about today. You're going to have to get over it. You've got to get these things together. Because a collective leadership of place, led by an industry like ours, does withstand the changes in government, does withstand changes in local political priorities. I leave you finally and fully with, I am looking for Team London. Please help me find it. make sure that Team Sheffield, Team Leeds, Team Manchester, you all go out of this room knowing that you're part of a home team and that being part of a collective leadership is much more important than being a tenacious individual. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It's now my very great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon, Matt Hancock, the new Minister for Digital and Culture. Literally in the job for only days, and I think this is at least the third major event at which he's come to speak to us in the arts. So a very big welcome to Matt, who's going to speak to us for about 20 minutes, and then there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. And Matt is going to be specifically talking to us about the role of digital in culture. So a very warm welcome from What Next to Matt.
Thanks very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I do want to talk about digital, but I also wanted to talk about digital here in Manchester, and it's fantastic to be here at home. This is the city's new cultural centre, and Andrea, what you were talking about just then about collective leadership in place, of place, can hardly better be described by any place in the UK than here in Manchester. The work that Sir Howard Bernstein has led, along with many others, over the past few years, has seen incredible things happen on the culture front. The Manchester International Festival, under its brilliant director team, and no doubt under John McGrath's direction will be brilliant next year. The fact that Manchester's been chosen to host the homecoming of the Olympic team, and of course the success of the Whitworth, led so brilliantly by Maria Bolshaw, where I'm going to be swept off to after this. But I wanted to talk specifically about also the impact of digital. To anybody involved in the video from Baz, and I thought it was a really good video, can I give you this word of reassurance? It happens to everybody. When Bill Gates came to address all of the amassed ranks of Conservative MPs, there were about 300 of us in the room in the House of Commons, and Bill Gates stood at the front. And here's this guy who built Microsoft and created Word and PowerPoint and all these things that we use every day. And about 4 slides in, his IT broke. It was an incredibly satisfying moment for anybody who has had their IT give up on them. And it took him a while to work out why we were all laughing so much. But I want to specifically talk about digital and the huge opportunities and the challenges that it brings, this technological revolution that we're all living through. And I want to ask the question, how do we ensure that excellence in our culture and the arts and the creative industries, how do they thrive in Britain? And how does British creativity thrive around the world? And I want to ask about how we ensure that we spread access to culture to all parts of our own country here at home. And I want to ask, how do we ensure the next generation are able to learn about and carry forward our cultural heritage? And how do we have a sustainable funding settlement long into the future? These are all issues that I know that have been discussed at length today. They're all vital questions. And I hope you'll allow me to address them through the prism of the digital revolution, because I think that digital disruption affects all of these things. And most of us here would probably remember the first time that we had digital disruption, the first time we saw a mobile phone or accessed the internet, or our first email or our first text message. It seemed rare and exciting. The thrill of being an early adopter back then was cutting edge. But now 80% of adults use the internet daily. 80% use the internet daily. 71% have a smartphone and 70% are on social media. This is true across all generations in all parts of our country. For the majority of people, digital has been fully embedded in all of our lives. And yet,
And yet, I don't think we are anywhere near unlocking its full potential. I'm struck by how in my first few weeks and months in this job, just how many conversations have come back to the impact of digital transformation. I've said in the past that the hipster is the capitalist. Well, the techie is increasingly the artist. And maybe I think this because I'm the minister for both digital and culture. But I think that that in itself is simply a reflection of reality. So I want to kick off this conversation. How do we do digital in the arts? This spring, the Culture White Paper proposed making the UK one of the world's leading countries for digitised public collections and enhancing the online experience. Last month at the BFI, who themselves are doing amazing work at digitising the national collections of TV and film, and then I spoke of the synthesis between digital and creativity and the need to capitalise on that synthesis. And I believe that it's at this nexus where content meets technology that our bread is going to be buttered in the 21st century, where our future economy will thrive, and with it, the well-being of our nation. Today, I want to ask very specifically, how can digital and the arts and culture best partner up to drive access, excellence, and synthesis? Because everybody is going to be affected. Everyone. In some ways, it's nothing new. From the introduction of artificial lighting, and shortly afterwards, no doubt, artificial lightning. In theatres, as far as I can find out, this was first tested in the Lyceum in 1816. To David Hockney, painting on his iPad, that is using his iPad to paint rather than defacing the screen. The major tech disruptions in industries were probably in music in the 1980s, in a sense that we'd recognise them today. And shortly after that, in film, and then in broadcasting, and in newspapers, and now it's everywhere. On Wednesday, I was part of the Royal Opera House's chorus, on stage. You'll be glad to know it was in virtual reality. I was able to look around at the performers around me. I could have sung as loud as I'd liked, and nobody was listening, and that's the way it's meant to be. But I could see the conductor out there, I could look up to the audience and up to the gods. I could enjoy myself because of their virtual reality recording of being in the chorus on stage at the Royal Opera House. The Philharmonia's Opera's recent digital installation, The Universe of Sound, allowed audiences into the inner workings of that orchestra. Here in Manchester, Future Everything is a digital innovation lab for digital culture, and their annual festival has been at the heart of the digital revolution for around 20 years now, commissioning works of digital art before it was cool. Digital is disrupting across the spectrum. Digital content, stage technologies, distribution, admin, box office, marketing, fundraising, advocacy. Digital is, in its essence, about change and about disruption. Tom Loosemore, who's one of the driving forces behind digital in government, managed to define it like this: digital, applying the culture, practices, processes, and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. All of that in under 140 characters, of course. The potential of digital is very big. It's about removing long-established boundaries and friction to bring what citizens and users want closer together. And with it comes the breakdown between sectors. And I think What Next is incredibly important for doing this and for bringing together different parts of what could otherwise be disparate sectors. The blurring of the lines between disciplines. Theatre is becoming film. Computer programming is merging with sculpture and with art. We have virtual reality curatorship, art that's also animation, video gaming assisted by classical music composition, and science meeting art increasingly. People, of course, still love a book or a film or a painting or a play. The physical side is incredibly important, and they will remain so. More people, though, can find these classics because they sit alongside a new form of cultural composition inspired by technology. So I just want to go through in turn excellence, access, and synthesis. Firstly, on excellence, I firmly believe that digital transformation has the opportunity to see artistic excellence reach new highs and that we can be leaders in getting this right. Last December, the National and the RSC were amongst 60 international arts organisations that partnered with Google's Cultural Institute for a first-of-its-kind digital showcase. It allowed audiences to experience more than 150 interactive stories. Art UK, the online home for art from every public collection in the UK, has been proving its worth as an educational resource. There's over 200,000 oil paintings by 38,000 artists, and most of this art is not on public view. Recently, it's shown even greater benefits because it's now searchable in a database. And, for instance, that database played a role in identifying Raphael's lost masterpiece, the Haddo Madonna. It may be controversial to some, but the millions of brains of collective humanity are better than the very best behind closed doors. Bigger collaboration brings better results. The British Library and Find My Past are creating the British Newspaper Archive, digitising 40 million newspaper pages over the next 10 years, returning to the big news stories of the past to anyone with an internet connection in the present. It's not only a question of putting existing physical content online, of course. More and more content is now born digital. Last year, here in Manchester, British artist Ed Atkins used mocap technology to create a digital record of more than 100 festival performers at the International Festival and merged them into a computer-generated avatar that was both a distinct individual and an echo of all those contributing performers. This entire digital creation then read from Ed's poetic script. You could call it a marriage of man and machine. And communities and audiences are no longer passive receivers once you go digital, but are directly influencing the creative process too. So this democratization is incredibly important. And all of the evidence and all of those I've spoken to tell me that far from drawing away from the original, the classic, and the physical, digital collaboration adds to it. And that is an incredibly important lesson. And as well as driving excellence, digital can also blast open access. This is the second point I want to make. It is blasting open access is one of my passions in this area. I think it's incredibly important. It's even more important now than it has ever been. And access doesn't just mean setting up a website and a Facebook page. That is merely scraping the surface. It's about much more, and each institution doing what works for them. A few years ago, we stripped off almost all of the rules and regulations around how the national organisations were run. We trusted the people who'd been put in charge. Now they operate as independent businesses, free from central control and able to deliver some real innovations, for instance, in online marketing and audience engagement, as well as on the creative side. I'd say to sponsored institutions, use these freedoms, and I'd encourage local authorities who still keep things centralised to follow that lead. As the new Nobel laureate Bob Dylan said, there is nothing so stable as change. And while we're talking of Bob Dylan, it's worth noting that Manchester was the scene of arguably his most famous gig when Bob Dylan went electric. It was described as one of the most important moments in 20th century music. In response to dissent from the audience, so we all get it when we go digital, he got it too. Some in the audience felt he was betraying his folk rock roots, and someone famously shouted out, Judas, and Dylan countered and turned to his band and told them to play it loud. That was Bob Dylan grabbing the digital age, and we must do it too. So I commend those who have trodden this path and blasted open access. National Theatre Live is opening up performances previously restricted to those who went through the doors of London's South Bank. It's getting to cinemas all over the world. The Royal Opera House now broadcasts live into the Arts Centre in Haverhill in my constituency in Suffolk. Others are following their lead. Last year, the Globe broadcast online and for free, and the sold-out final show of its fantastic Midsummer Night's Dream, making it available to new audiences in the UK, and it's available still on iPlayer if you want to watch it. In fact, the UK is now a global leader in event cinema, with 35 active distributors of content and the only trade body for the industry, the Event Cinema Association. But 35 is still small. In 2014, Event Cinema was worth over 35 million and accounted for 3% of total box office sales. It's growing, and I hope it grows yet more. In a recently published digital culture survey conducted by the Arts Council and the Arts and Humanities Research Council and Nesta, this is the first authoritative primary research into the impact of digital work on audiences and organisations. The findings are encouraging. Audiences don't see streamed content as an alternative to the live experience, but as something distinct and complementary. Streamers tend to be younger and more diverse. I'm delighted that the Arts Council just announced another 4.6 million to support projects to open up diversity, and this funding will have a digital angle. But this bursting out open and getting to younger and more diverse audiences is just the start, but it is a massive opportunity. It's not just theatre. Of course, blasting out online opens up everything you do to a global audience too. And here is a crucial point that I know has been discussed this morning. It enhances understanding and people's view of Britain around the world. It enhances our soft power. It transcends borders. It brings people together. And, of course, it potentially generates income. And alongside the Arts Council, UK Theatre and the Society of London Theatre, they're now working with different organisations like Canvas and The Space, for instance, to offer training for organisations large and small to join those who've started down this path to develop and distribute digital content, both internationally and at home. Let's turn to education. A year on from the Nationals Learning Programme and the On Demand in Schools scheme, 2,200 schools are now signed up to the free service. 2,200 schools to this one service. 2/3 of those schools are located outside London in the southeast. Schools can now watch recordings of 6 national productions from their classroom. Frankenstein, Hamlet, Othello, She Stoops to Conquer, Comedy of Errors, and the first title aimed at primary schools, Treasure Island. So that is a brilliant example of engaging in a new way with education. World Ballet Day 2016 more than doubled its audience with a Facebook live feed from 5 of the world's top ballet companies, including the Royal Ballet in London. From 350,000 who were engaged in 2015 to over 700,000 this year. They also managed to achieve something else that was a bit unusual. At 20 hours, it's the longest stream ever to be shown on Facebook Live, and World Ballet Day trended worldwide on Twitter. I'm assured that for 20 hours it wasn't the same ballerinas and ballet dancers for the whole period, but the longest ever stream on Facebook, all thanks to ballet, and that got out to a far wider audience than it otherwise would have done. And many of our cultural institutions cluster around our great cities. So we're used to talking about the London divide with the rest of the country, and it is important that we do everything we can to close that, and the recent settlement and funding from the Arts Council made some progress. But actually, it's about more than that. It's more sophisticated and more subtle. Our great cultural institutions cluster around our great cities, mostly. London, Liverpool, here in Manchester. And in those great cities, it is easier to access for everybody. But digital can make everywhere local. And that means that we can spread geographically, yes, to other great cities outside of London, which is important, but also much more broadly across the UK. Because diversity isn't only about the protected characteristics. Diversity is about getting everywhere in the UK and making sure everybody is fully engaged. So access can clearly be spread. There are endless examples. Who actually saw the tribute to our fallen at the Somme? We're here because you're here. And the ghostly soldiers. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. All around the country. Who actually saw it? Well, 30 million people saw it on social media. Who actually saw London's Burning, the brilliant model of London in 1666 that was set alight on the Thames? I thought that was amazing too. I didn't see it. I watched it on Twitter. Even the smallest organisations, the most remote, can make their work reach an international audience. And this is two-way traffic, because interactivity and crowdsourcing those models can bring in ideas too. So let us now turn to the third example, and the third question, which is about the synergy and where we can get benefits for culture from using the digital revolution. Digital technology essentially enables a networking culture. It helps collaboration, it provides access to a richness of cultural content, and a richness of content to mash up, to adapt, to personalise. So it is a great democratisation. But I know that it is not all straightforward. How is the audience and consumer feedback filtering through to you? Do you actively encourage it? Do you act on what's said? The opportunities we know are huge for personalisation, for co-creation, for active audience participation. How do we make the most of these? And one of the questions that increasing numbers of people are raising is this, and I just want to dwell on this as the last major point I want to make. Art, yes, is far more than intellectual property. It has intrinsic value and the capacity to move us and educate us in ways that transcend economic analysis. But to the extent that art is intellectual property, how should we manage it? When culture is publicly funded, should we also make it freely available? If a great artwork is used by others commercially, should they pay a fee? If so, how much? By what licensing mechanism should this be arranged? How much is it reasonable for the platform to claim, and how much the creator? When it's UK taxpayers making the contribution, when cultural content is publicly owned, as it often is, when should we be making things freely available? And when we send it around the world, should we charge? When should we monetize the IP in order to invest more in the arts? And when should we give away more, or give away to a targeted audience, to those who'd be otherwise excluded? How do we ensure creators are properly rewarded for their creation? Because without the creation, there is no art. These questions, essentially about the impact of intellectual property and digital, but ultimately around the impact of digital on culture, are important questions, and I don't have the answers. But I want to start a conversation around them, because I know from talking to organisations in, say, publishing or music or TV or film who have spent years wrestling with them, protecting their intellectual property, making the most of their back catalogues, they themselves are again being disrupted, and business models are being put to the test by new technology. And then there's areas where this sort of thinking hasn't yet reached, or is only just beginning to reach. But we have a huge amount to learn from each other. And I think What Next plays an important role in curating that cross-fertilisation and cross-pollination that digital technology is bringing because of the challenges that it brings. Let me give you a couple of examples. The representatives of record companies here and in the US recently took legal action against the world's largest stream ripping site, YouTubeMP3.org, which has generated millions of dollars for its owners without paying anything to artists or rights holders. Digital services offer fans more options than ever to listen to music legally over hundreds of services with millions of tracks, which all compensate artists and labels. Now, we've got one of the strongest IP protection frameworks in the world, but we've got to make sure that it stays that way, because without the support going back to the creators and the ultimate originators of the intellectual property, then there is no content. The Digital Economy Bill, which is in front of Parliament, includes measures to bring criminal penalties for online copyright infringement, which is in line with physical infringement. I believe very strongly that creators should be rewarded, and I fear that the traditional structures for protecting people's property, when it's intellectual property, are being eroded. We have one of the best regimes in the world, and we've taken steps, but I want to ask what more needs to be done. Some changes don't need legislation. For instance, acting on the findings of the Live to Digital report, UK Theatre and the Society of London Theatre have taken the lead for negotiating a standard agreement for live to digital rights and royalty fees, and are working with Equity and with publishing houses and trade bodies and collection agencies and agents. But if we need to keep the legislation framework up to date, as we are doing in the Digital Economy Bill at the moment, then I am prepared to act. Like most good things in life, this can't be done on your own. And I want to hear from you. I want to start this conversation and understand what matters to you. Ultimately, when it comes to digital in culture, as with all of the other issues you've been discussing today, we can't make these changes on our own. We have to do it in partnership. I know in government we can only get that right if we listen to you and ask what your concerns are, and then go away and act on them where we can. I see that as my job, whether it's in digital or any of the other crucial areas, to make sure that Britain's art and culture and creative industries go from strength to strength. And I look forward to working with you to make it happen. Thank you very much. Do you mind if I have a drink?
Not at all. Thank you very much, Matt. And conscious of time, and you did say we'd start a conversation with us. Well, we haven't got very much time for a conversation here this afternoon, but I'm sure we'll see you again. So thank you very much. But we have, I think, I'll allow for a couple of questions while Matt's here. There's a Marcus in the middle, in the circle there.
Thank you very much indeed, Marcus Davey from the Roundhouse, and I'm sure we'd all like to join the conversation with you. My question is about something slightly different, but encapsulate all of these things. I think we're proud to be part of a country that is creative, imaginative, and we make things. One of the things that I think we all feel, you probably already guessed where this question is going, there is a disaster. There's many great stories, but there is a disaster, and the disaster is in education. Last year we saw 45,000 less GCSEs taken in creative subjects. If we want to retain our position as makers, innovators, we need to continue to be creative and innovative and imaginative. How can we help you work towards encouraging the government to embrace arts in the STEM subjects, make STEAM? I know this has been going on for years, but we seem to be getting not very far very quickly. And I think we probably all agree that this is the one thing that we really need to move on very quickly.
Yeah. Well, first of all, happy birthday. Exciting to see the Roundhouse's birthday. I entirely understand the concern. The decision by the examining board to remove the last art history A-level last week was disappointing. And I think that and there's clearly work to be done here. Now, part of this is for government, and I accept the challenge. Part of it also is broader than that. I think I've used these figures before at a What Next event, but in Wales, where they have a completely different education system, they're also seeing the same direction of travel. Now, that doesn't excuse it. They are at GCSE. That doesn't excuse it. But what it does do is it means that we need to ask the broadest of questions. Because ultimately, you know where my heart is on this. Britain is only going to succeed in the 21st century as a creative nation. Nobody owes us a living. We're only going to earn a living if we can create things that are interesting and at the cutting edge. And making sure that that is drilled through the whole system and the whole of government, I think, is important. So, believe you me, when I have something to say about this, I'll be coming and letting you know.
Thank you very much. And I do know that you've talked about this before and your heart is in the right place for it. We're all here to help and have that conversation and to move absolutely in the direction of incorporating the arts more firmly in the centre of our society, especially through education.
Yeah. I think there's... what can we do to help? There is a question which I haven't yet quite got an answer to, which is about how we frame the argument about the impact. Because it is ultimately, in my view, about life chances. And the inside government, I've been a DFE minister, so I understand how that department works. And it thinks about life chances, and it thinks about exam results because of their impact on life chances. We need to frame in a highly evidenced way the impact of creativity on life chances. Now, everything I have ever seen tells me that the impact is very strong. But we need to be able to take that evidence and make the argument. So when I was in DFE, one of the things I brought in was, instead of just having league tables for exam results, we now have league tables for where you end up afterwards. Because ultimately, education is much broader than just your exam results. And I think that's important, and I think that will help in us making the case that culture and creativity and the arts help lift people's eyes to the horizon and ultimately improve life chances, which is what education is all about.
Thank you. That was a slightly longer Q and a slightly longer A than I was planning for.
I've got as long as you like.
Given that it got a round of applause, I know that was a subject that's close to all our hearts. I am conscious of the time, and we have 2 more speakers, so sorry, I am going to close us off there. But I know, Matt, we'll see you again in forums like this, and thank you very much for taking the time this afternoon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I have been told that the technology is working for the Baz video, so we'll go straight to that again with fingers crossed, and then we'll get on to our next speaker. Thank you. Sorry?
Can we skip Baz and have more questions?
5 minutes. Okay, well, is you okay, Matt?
Well, I've never had an encore before.
Okay, so yes, okay, up at the top there again. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. I work for and lead a small independent drawing company, and in many senses you're pushing against doors open. We want to do digital.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
My concern is that by prioritising the work that's already happened with the national companies, the gates are already shut on us.
Okay, I totally...
That's a big problem.
Yes.
Because not only is that a problem for the small independents, and I'm talking as much to programmes here as I am to you, actually, if that's okay, that in terms of diversity, actually that could be reductive. And in terms of people experiencing the canon, that could be reductive. And understanding what the canon could be in the future, that will be reductive. And where will the new work come from? I love the fact that you've sung with the Royal Opera House Choir. I'm going to do that. But then I wonder, if I'm a 12-year-old and I do that and I discover my inner composer, where do I get to do my composition?
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And in fact, I was struck in writing this speech. By the way, I'll carry on answering questions so long as nobody tells Baz. In writing this, it was striking how it's the examples that were easiest to reach are from the big national organisations, and they have the deepest pockets. But that also may well be because I don't know about your example, and I want to. So I entirely understand the challenge. I suppose my response is that is happening, and the organisations are going down this road, and we've got to make sure that the result of that expands rather than reduces the physical and also the number of organisations in this space. So I accept the challenge. There is no easy answer. But we can't bury our heads in the sand because things are moving in this direction, and we need to make sure that we support diversity of both of access and of organisations along the way.
Thank you. One more question here at the front, Polly. Is there a microphone?
Hello, I'm Polly Hamilton. I'm Vice Chair of the Chief Culture and Leisure Officers Association. So we are the national organisation which is very much at the coalface in terms of some of the challenges that we're all facing in communities, whether in London or in the regions. And I have a question, because I loved your speech, and thank you for that, and thank you for coming here today, and for recognising what a powerful forum this is. So I loved what you had to say about excellence and the many examples that you've given. And I agree that digital is absolutely part of the future, and that creativity is also part of that future. So your vision for the GCSE and all of that is one to be applauded.
Here comes the but.
My question is, have you, or could you, begin to articulate for us today your vision for tackling the digital exclusion that goes hand in hand with the cultural exclusion that too many of our communities face, particularly in places like Blackpool or Sunderland or wherever?
Totally agree with you. Firstly, thank you for the work that you do, ensuring that local authorities continue to play their leading role, both in physical places we were talking about before, but also in supporting culture is incredibly important. It's especially on the funding front, frankly, where there are lots of statutory draws on their resources, making sure that we keep that going. And that support is incredibly important. It's something that I'm working with the Arts Council on. In terms of the digital, essentially digital access, you can't blast open cultural access on digital platforms for people who don't have digital access. This is Get Online Week, and I started this morning. My first event was in Cambridge at a Get Online event. There is now about 90% of people in the UK have used the internet. 80% use it daily. So there's clearly a gap between the 80% who use it daily, 10% who have used it but don't daily, and then 10% not at all. That number has been reducing relatively sharply. We aim to reduce it by 25% every 2 years. And there's a whole series of programmes, partly funded by government, also funded by local authorities and the private sector to get that support out there. For instance, the work the Tinder Foundation does is incredibly important, and obviously teaching digital in schools, although this tends to be at the older end of the age spectrum. But I would say that it's interesting that in the figures, less than 1% of people who've never used the internet say that a bad broadband connection is the problem. Now, as somebody whose broadband connection went down this weekend, I feel the pain of all of those of you who don't have a good broadband connection. But it's mostly about skills rather than the physical, and a huge amount of it is about motivation. People not wanting to get online because they're worried about getting online and they don't see the point. You can play a part in increasing that motivation, because if somebody's never gone online before, never thought it was for them, if they think that by going online they can sing in the chorus at the Royal Opera House, maybe for the first time they'll think it's worth getting that internet connection.
Okay, I am going to call Privet from the stage now and cut that off, because we do have two more speakers and we're getting on for 5 o'clock. But a very big thank you to Matt, and thank you for your extra questions. Thank you. Okay, great, thank you. Now we've voted for the live, not the digital, here in the forum. I'm going to go straight to our next speaker. I'm delighted to welcome Mike Emmerich. Mike is currently the founding director of Metro Dynamics Limited, but before that he was CEO of New Economy in Manchester and central to the Manchester devolution deal. So it'll be really interesting to hear from Mike. Mike, welcome to the stage.
I'm sensing that there may be an appetite for this to be quick.
So let me say a few words, and I'm even going to time myself so I don't go too overboard. So I'm not Paul Mason. I think what I'm going to say is a little bit different to Paul Mason. I want to touch on three things, if I might. The economic and fiscal context within which we're working, how I think you as a sector can make more of a difference in the travails we face as a country, and I want to leave you with a challenge. Firstly, on the economy, you've heard this morning about LEPs and devolution, and for sure there's money in those bodies. But, you know, whatever happens, I think the fiscal climate we are in is going to be brutal, and we have to be really, really smart about how we handle this. There's more austerity to come from local government. I'm doing the annual meeting of the Book Trust tomorrow. God alone knows what I'm going to say to them in the current context. There's more to come. We're going to see the devolution of business rates to councils, so grant will be going from a lot of councils. It's not going to be easy. Then we've got the challenge of Brexit, which is definitely going to make us poorer. Yes, there may be a fiscal boost if Philip Hammond thinks he's got any fiscal room for manoeuvre. Excuse me. If Philip Hammond thinks he's got any room for manoeuvre. But by the same token, that the pound's plummeting and interest rates are going to go up, which means he might have less fiscal room for manoeuvre than he thought. So, against a fairly brutal backdrop, secondly, I want to think about where you as a sector can place yourselves. And I say this partly from my experience. I've been a Heritage Lottery Fund trustee. I'm a trustee of the Royal Northern College of Music and of Manchester Chamber Orchestra, the Manchester Camerata. And everything I'm about to say is based on my experience from those things, but also from my day job as being the sort of chief economic advisor to Manchester for 10 years and what I see advising cities around the country. I don't think this sector takes itself seriously enough in an economic context. It's a major export industry. Every tourist who comes in to see something, to participate in a cultural event, is an export. They're buying pounds. And you never present yourselves in that way, in a way I think you should. Not only that, it's a ridiculously low-paid sector with very high productivity that encourages in very, very wealthy people to hear a lot of what you do. That may be embarrassing to shout about, but it is an undoubted asset to an economy in the state that ours is in right now. But I want to talk about the sector in two other senses, because I think you are a much bigger part of the solution to the problems of our country than is often understood. When I was on the Heritage Lottery Fund, we commissioned some work from Robert Holden and Demos, and were instrumental in his work on cultural value at the time. And I've never lost sight of the rubric of culture having intrinsic, institutional and instrumental benefits. And I think at this time, above all, we are downplaying the instrumental benefits of culture. And I say that because fundamentally the British public service model doesn't work. It doesn't work in absolutely myriad ways because we have an ageing population. We have public services that are costing ever more money. The efficacy of a great many of the things that we spend public money on in social care is of very questionable value. And what's more, we have got most of the money tied up in acute services, which frankly do not tally with what we know from epidemiology are the drivers of ill health and social exclusion. To give you an illustration, we know that 75% of the easy cases who go onto welfare to work programs come off unemployed. There's a 25% at maximum success rate. We also know from small schemes that you will all be aware of that programs that work with people with mild to moderate mental health problems, the long-term unemployed in the arts and cultural sector can have a really serious impact on the lives of people affected, and probably with a much higher than 25% success rate. The problem? You never evaluate it. There's never enough really serious econometric evaluation to prove that, frankly, what you do is of more value to society, more value to the exchequer in instrumental terms than what the welfare to work industry does. So my creed occur to you is that we get much more serious about evaluation. The same is true in relation to dementia, where I've seen music therapy do things with people with dementia that other service interventions couldn't do at anything like the price. And most of those go unevaluated too. And as a result, we keep doling out multi-millions, tens of millions contracts to providers who don't do what I believe you could do. And I never saw this in anything like the way I think I should have done when I was working for Manchester, or indeed anywhere else. The third way in which I think you can help with our current dilemmas as a country is in relation to Brexit. I don't think it's much of an exaggeration to say that our country is increasingly at war with itself. There's long been a debate in the literature as to whether this is a Norman or an Anglo-Saxon country. I can see both strains of that in our debates. London versus the rest, something that plays out all the time. Metropolitan versus suburban. Scots versus English. Liberal versus authoritarian, which I think is going to be an increasingly strong strain in our current debates. Brexit versus Remain. Today, a petition has been launched, though thankfully the person who produced it, a Conservative politician, has been suspended from his party, which suggests that there should be a debate in Parliament that anybody promoting membership of the European Union should be guilty of treason. I kid you not. Google it. This country is at war with itself. And I think one of the things that I want from the cultural sector is help, alongside what we do in the economic and social sphere, to really try and navigate what I think are to be some very, very troubled waters in the period ahead. Because arts and culture and heritage should help us connect with ourselves, with who and what we are. Because I think Brexit, political extremism, left and right, political disengagement as well, are all different attempts by people to take control of their lives in ways that they think is needed because their lives are out of control. And I've seen this at the Heritage Lottery Fund, through estate histories where people who were organising for the BNP actually then start to organise for the community because they've understood that everybody's a migrant, not just the people who look and sound differently to them. And I don't think I saw enough of that in my time in Manchester either. But that's all easy. I want to leave you with a challenge. Because if Paul Mason were here, he would no doubt say that the neoliberal claptrap people like me talk, and I don't consider myself a neoliberal by any stretch of the imagination, I hasten to add, it's all down to the neoliberals. It's down to the economic model that's left people with no money and no security. And he's got a very, very good point. But frankly, I don't think it's just neoliberal economists. I don't think it's just Amazon and Google and the gig economy. I think we're all in this together. I'm writing a book at the minute on cities. It'll be available it'll be available on Amazon in the new year. And you can follow, indeed, if there are any left. And you can follow me on Twitter, Emmerich_Mike, and you can find out more about it. One thing I read that I want to leave you with that touched me very deeply when I was reading it was about the intellectual life of the British working classes, and Jonathan Rose's book, which helped me understand something I hadn't understood previously. Why is it that in cities like this, with the autodidact movement, the working class education movement, and choral societies and instrumental societies and all sorts of other things in the 19th century, do we find ourselves with such an anti-intellectual, uneducated culture in our society? And for sure, what we heard about in our education system is a part of that. I think the cultural sector has got a role to play in that crime too. And Jonathan Rose thinks so in his analysis. Because part of the modernist revolution in the 20th century sought to disconnect working class people from high culture, because working class people tend to be culturally conservative. So just as we look at the government for what it's got to do, at private enterprise at what it's got to do, I think one of the things we've all got to look very, very hard at in the next period is how we engage with working class people about what it is they want to know about. And the final anecdote to leave you with, one of my clients is the city of Aarhus in Denmark, the European City of Culture next year. Two of their best projects include Den Gamle By, which is a recreation of Danish buildings in the middle of the city, and another museum, the Mosgaard Museum, both described as kitsch and culturally uninteresting by people I know in the cultural sector. But in a social democratic country that is speaking very loud and clear to people, rich and poor, those sorts of projects are reconnecting people with who and what they are. That might not be the right way for Britain, but that is a legitimate goal that we've all got to rise to. Thank you.
Thank thank you, Mike, for that really thoughtful and thought-provoking talk to us. I've been told to say that we're not going to finish at 5, which is about 10 minutes ago. So if you do have to go, then please do so. We are going to run on to about 5:30. Do stay if you can, because we've got some really good, a very good close for you. So if we move to our next speaker, Rosie Luff, who's on the board of the NCA, but is also the Communications and Policy Advisor to all of us in What Next. She's got an announcement to make, something that's launching today to tell us. Thanks, Rosie.
So yes, hi everyone. Obviously I'm not Cassie Chasserton. They've just swapped one arts activist from the Midlands for another arts activist from the Midlands. So hello. I, as Sally says, I do the politics and the communications and the campaigning for What Next nationally. I'm also very lucky to be on the board of the NCA, and I'm here today to tell you about an exciting new project that we're working on together. I'd like you to imagine, if you can, what it must be like to be a local councillor at the moment, or just in general. It's a really, really tough time to be working in local government. We all know funding is going down dramatically, drastic cuts. We're on the brink of seeing one local government, a local association somewhere going bankrupt. And in general, people know very little about what it is that local authorities and local councillors do. And the people that do know what councillors and local authorities and local cultural officers do very, very rarely say thank you. We collectively know about the trauma of working with local politicians that just don't get what we do. But what about the people that quietly show real quality of leadership, who work with us to create partnerships, to champion innovation, who invest in us, and that's just despite everything that's going on around them. So that's why What Next and the NCA have teamed up to launch Hearts for the Arts. It's a way of saying thank you to the people that get it. And we want your help to celebrate the councils, the councillors and the cultural officers who are doing exceptional work to keep the arts at the heart of community life. As with everything we do, a sort of What Next and What Next NCA way, it's a little bit on a shoestring and we're doing it at top speed. This is very much a pilot scheme, so bear with us. If there's anything you don't like or anything you disagree with or anything you want us to do better, do tell us quietly. But we do want you and your friends and your neighbours to send us your nominations for those incredible councils and councillors in 3 categories. Best Local Authority Initiative, so that's a really broad category, which is everything that talks about, it could be strong leadership or a particular project or a particular partnership or the sustainability of an initiative. The Best Local Authority Arts Champion, if there's one person that's really stood out and really put themselves out there and really gone out on a wing and a prayer to support the arts. And the Best Local Authority Arts Project encouraging community cohesion, because as we've just been talking a lot about today, a lot of what we do is actually about communities and working relationships in practice. There is way more information than I'm going to talk to you about today, because I know we're all busy, on this amazing nomination, hard copy nomination form, which you can pick up on your way out today. Don't drop by the registration desk and pick one up. Nominations close on the 11th of November, so that's quite fast. And the awards are going to be judged by a lovely all-star panel, which will include the NCA Chair, Sam West, and our very own David Lann. So in a very What Next way, this whole thing is an experiment in spreading positive connections. We do want it to grow. This year it's a bit cheap and cheerful, but we hope it's going to be effective nonetheless. But we do need your help in showing the good guys, those good councillors, those unsung heroes, that we love them and setting a good example. So thanks very much, and over to you guys.
Hello, this time I'm David Jubb, and so I thought I'd wear a hat and a disguise. So I've just been charged, as David Lann was charged, just to maybe sum up for 5 minutes, which is quite a difficult challenge. But I wanted to just say 3 quick things that I've heard today from inspirational people, most of whom I'd not met before, and thoughts that I would just like to echo, really, and perhaps as a way of us asking ourselves now, what's next? So firstly, I met someone this morning called Mariam, who lives here in Manchester and who was awarded the Woman on the Move Woman of the Year award in 2016. She's been in the asylum system in this country for 8 years. Her experience includes detention, homelessness and destitution, and she hasn't seen her children in 8 years. And yet, despite this, Mariam shows incredible force of will, dedication and support for others. She's making a difference by connecting with other people, with local residents, with teachers, with politicians, with artists, with people working in business. She daily goes out of her comfort zone to get to know people and to take action and to make a difference. She's a total inspiration. And she puts some of the challenges that we face and we have discussed in perspective. And I think it's always good to have perspective. But Mariam also made me think that on a completely different scale and level, that at its best, this is what Next is about, isn't it? Not simply putting our own interests first, our organisation or our own practice or even our own sector, but connecting with other organisations or people or sectors to explore their interests, to see what we can do together to add up to more than the sum of our parts. And as many of you have shown today through your presentations, the more we do this, the more interesting and transformational things actually become. Secondly, and also earlier today, I heard someone providing a summing up of what we could do as cultural organisations, as individual artists, as people, to take action to connect with people in our communities who we are currently failing to connect with. And this is massive for us, I think. As this individual provided us with a great summary of ideas, they described things like food, like hosting, like using sport, social gatherings, and it was noticeable that their long list of things would not conventionally be defined as arts. But their list was a series of things which we, as artists or as organisations, can bring a huge amount of creativity to. It was a list of things that would provide us with a great opportunity to connect with the innate and abundant creativity in others. Surely creativity is more likely to bring us together with everyone in our community as a shared human characteristic, rather than solely championing a specific art form or other. Creativity has the potential to bring everyone in our community together, and I think this is important for What Next. Thirdly and finally, that we are all people first in this room. Some of us are artists, some of us are producers, some of us are politicians, civil servants, people who work in education, in health. And what I find incredibly exciting about What Next, and today, especially this morning actually, has reminded me of this, is that this is not about them and us. This is not about a sector selfishly kind of plotting its own rise and the rest can go hang. We are people. And we passionately care about other people and their creativity. And in any What Next meeting that happens around the country, if the people that we want to work with creatively are not in the room, then let's just invite them. And like our friends in Newcastle, be clever. If you think they won't come, maybe offer them some food or some drink. So what's next right now? In the wise words of Liz O'Neill from Z Arts that are still ringing in my ears from lunchtime, it's often not about the big, massive action, it's about the small action. Big things have small beginnings. You have a postcard. This is your postcard. Please commit your actions to these postcards, and if you want to be reminded of them, just pop them in the box. I've done various projects like this where you put something and it gets posted back to you 3 months or 3 years later. It's a profound moment when it arrives. So I would really encourage you to put your actions onto this postcard, however small, and they will be posted back to you. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our final contributor today, but first I wanted to thank everyone at home and all of the generous venues who've offered their support for today. Also, thanks to all the individuals and organisations who've contributed to make the day possible, and especially, perhaps who haven't been mentioned yet, the Exec What Next team, who are all amazing. Thank you. Thanks to everyone here for contributing, and thanks to those people watching on the live stream for being part of today. So I'd like to introduce you to Elmi Ali, who is a writer, a performer, and a facilitator. He's based in the Northwest and is currently working at Contact on a directorial placement. He's been roaming around, some of you may have met him earlier today, the What Next event today, and is charged to offer us a creative response. Please welcome Emily to the stage, and when he is complete, we will head to the bar for anyone who doesn't have a train to catch. Elmi.
Hello. Hey guys, you all right? I have the pleasure of this tall order to try and sort of summarize everything that I've heard into something coherent. It's been really interesting listening to all the conversations that have happened in the room. And this is my attempt at trying to string something together. So, what next? For arts and culture, there's a great opportunity. Art is a boon, a haloed illumination of an overflowing cornucopia, the gift that keeps giving. We can't help but make art. Can't help but be fertile to the seed when it enters the mind. Can't help the miracle of the first shoot. The government can learn the cultural imperative from the cultural industry. What's the strategy? What's next? What's next for the arts? What's next for the artists? What's next for culture? What's next for the community? What's next for participation? If culture is an island, isolated, and unique in ecology, it still has to have a good working port. The docks must be manned by the artists. It is we who traffic in story, who have the grammar for the heavy lifting, who have utterly resigned ourselves to the Sisyphean. Britain's global calling card is arts and culture. Yet we ask ourselves how we can assert ourselves, how to be more muscular, how to balance the odds. There's a good economic argument, a hearts and mind argument, a political argument, a case for arts and culture and sports, arts, culture and health, arts, culture and education, arts, culture and politics, arts, culture and speaking truth to power. It is the artist's responsibility to handle the foliage, to peddle what is good and wholesome, what works. Advocacy works. Having a voice, growing the voice, moving and shaking the region with voice. The work continues. Art is a full embrace, nothing half-hearted, not lukewarm. It is the season of work. We face forward to the labor at hand. Artists looking ahead, looking head-on at climate change, the climate being a constraint that artists allow themselves to explore. For it to be a viewpoint to be considered soberly, for organizations to make clear energy actions. Who makes decisions? If decisions should change, shouldn't the decision makers change also? To make real change, we need the collective. We need to cultivate the chorus. We need diversity. It is not the first time, and it won't be the last time we discuss the problem of diversity within the arts. Art gives language. It has an echo chamber effect where excited voices bounce off of each other, thronging yet atomized. Diversity is inviting more voices into the echo chamber. It makes the commercial sector is more diverse than the public sector. It makes commercial sense to be diverse. We're beginning to believe that, and that is happening. Organizations are going down that road. We can't bury our head in the sand anymore. Things are moving in that direction. If there is one word I would use to describe politics right now, it is disruptions. The physical climate is brutal, is going to be brutal. The pound is plummeting, drastic cuts, we are devolving. What is Britain's place in the world? People know very little. Are we engaging with the issues in an authentic way? What is the use of all this greatness? Is doing less better? What of humility? Not as an excuse, but as a support mechanism for growth. The small things matter. They make all the difference. Instead of taking on the world, let's make connections. Let's thank each other. Thank those administration wizards. Thank the fundraisers. Thank those who set the chairs, as squatting would have been an undue hardship on all of us. Thank those who wired the mic. Thanks to the elbow grease of the arts. We need a civic role for the arts. When we're doing more with less, we need to prioritize. We need to galvanize. Everyone is involved. It's a movement. Please get up and move with us. Big things have small beginnings. All of us here are cultural connectors. The people in this room need to believe in their brilliance. A roller coaster has gone downhill, but it also goes up. There is no magic bullet. There are networks like this. A great labor, an even greater passion, and a legitimate goal we have all risen to. Thank you.